Over the next couple weeks, we're going to be battling time and heat to do our pole barn metal roof ourselves. We'll be saving about $10,000, but it will also be one of the most dangerous jobs we've done so far.
I realized I made a crucial mistake. James, don't fall off. So the goal this week for the pole barn build is to get the entire metal roof installed.
So as you can see, we ran our rafter tails wild. So the first thing we're going to do is get these measured and marked, and this will also give us our location for our first purlin. My buddy Randy showed up to give me a hand on this side of the shed roof, and I am running 2x4x16s, and the reason I'm running those is primarily cost. At my local builder's supply house, the 2x4s were cheaper than the 1x4s. And since we're installing the metal roof ourselves, I would much rather walk on a 2x4 versus a 1x4.
We got all the purlins up on one side of the shed roofs, and I realized I made a crucial mistake. We had our rafters racked up on our sawhorses checking for crown. One thing we missed was actually marking them for our 24 centers for our purlins, which that led us to wasting a ton of time yesterday on actually marking them up top, running strings, chalk lines, all that stuff. It was a huge waste of time. So definitely do not forget to mark all your rafters while they're on the ground before you put them up. Luckily today I have 2 more buddies come over to help, so we have this side left to knock out the purlins. We're gonna get those up there and then hopefully pick up the metal and we'll start slinging some tin for the roof. What we're doing now is tying in the Simpson strong ties on the bottom of the rafters. I waited to get that done until we got the top roof set on. Now we know everything's square. We're just going back through with a level, making sure these posts are good and then tying them in. I got Nick out here. He's been out here for almost the whole build. And then I got my buddy James. He's out here to join us as well and throwing a hand. So we should get a lot of progress done today.
And on the rafter tails, we're just measuring 16 inches out on the front and the back one, and then we'll run a string line on top. We'll have those vertical level cuts, and then that way it'll eliminate any of the bowing in the walls, if there isn't.
Pick your chalk line up on the edge. Make sure it stays in that line right there.
Pull it down?
Yeah, no, pull it down.
Right here you can see the elevated string. We did that with a nail about 1 inch above the rafter, and then used a speed square that was set to our roof pitch.
All right, so we got our rafter tails cut off on this side. The other side is going to be a little more difficult because we already put the purlin on the rafter tail. And we ran that just because these rafters on this side were just really wild and twisted. That allowed us to get these straight and tied in. So now we're going to go back and cut them.
Now that all the rafter tails are cut, the last thing we have to do is install the purlins on the other shed roof. Our purlins ended up being about 24 inches on center, and now we're installing our flying purlin. This is going to be the very end. We're going to measure it out, and this will actually hold your fascia. We measured ours at 12 inches of overhang.
Now we're going to start laying this metal on the roof. We squared the building up. We threw a couple marks out just to make sure that we can line it up and we're square. We got Nick up top. We're going to put some screws in to hold it. We got James back here helping us line it up on the eaves. So let's get to it.
Once we finally got in a groove, we started to catch a rhythm and get this installed pretty quick, but this was pretty sketchy doing this. When you were at the peak of these trusses, you were about 26 feet off the ground, and it was pretty high. So luckily I had these guys to help me out because personally I'm not a huge fan of heights, and as the day went on my feet began to feel like boat anchors and I started to move pretty slow. But despite the extreme heat, we were actually able to finish up one section of the roof.
Just finished one run. It is hot as crap. Calling it a day. The tin we're using is a 5-rib Galvalume panel. It's 29 gauge, and to attach it we're using these 1-inch wood to metal screws. These are made for metal roofing. They have a little rubber washer on there, you can see. The only thing you want to be concerned with is that you don't over tighten the washer. But as long as the washer doesn't squirt out completely, you're good to go. And one panel will overlap the other. So when you start your panel, or the very first panel you start, you want to make sure that panel is perfectly square with your building. So we ran some long tapes from front to back to make sure that that panel was square, and then we just ran the whole thing down. 172. So there's no particular set length for your tin panels. I measured from the top of our transition all the way down to our rafter tails, added 2 inches, and that was my length for that panel. Once I had all those measurements and the lengths I needed, I called 3 local metal roofing companies, and they sent out 3 bids. I went with the cheapest one, and they cut everything I needed to the length, and they added the transitions I needed from the monitor to the shed, the ridge cap, and also threw in the wood screws. And the local metal roof company in my area needed about 3 to 4 days to have everything cut to length. Now before we move forward, I want to go ahead and address these holes right here. We're running our rafter tails open or exposed, and we're not going to fill in any soffit on the underside. So what I'm going to do now, while it's still open on most of it, I'm going to take some blocking, cut it to length, and close off these parts right here. This will protect it from birds or squirrels, rodents, anything like that. And since we cut off all our rafter tails, a lot of those sections that we cut off will work perfectly for these blocks. We got all the blocking done on the shed roof rafters. Now we're gonna go up top to the monitor section and see how we can close that one in.
On the top side, we did the same thing. We used some extra 2x6 wood pieces, cut them to length, and attached them with some exterior screws.
So I got most of the blocking in. We came up short about a couple pieces of 2x6. I gotta go get those, but we got enough in to make it a little bit easier. My buddy Kimbrough's over here today. We're gonna run on this metal, and as we did last time, the first thing we did was run 2 measurements from the end truss all the way to here. This will start our first run again for the first sheet of metal. So we're gonna get this first sheet up here, and then we gotta figure out exactly how we're gonna put this ridge cap on, because right now we have a few ideas of about how we're going to do it, but we're not 100% yet. So we're going to get up here, get the first sheet on, and see if we can make something happen. Open everything. Yep. Back in just a scotch. Back out a little bit. Yeah. You know it, though. I need a little more down here. Hang. A little more. All right.
Measure?
Right.
Well, no, you can't measure.
That's right at 2.
All right, so that's in.
So now all we need is to get a measurement from that top up there, and we'll just get it square. So we got our first panel set up here, and it's screwed into the top, just one screw. I got James up there measuring from the panel to our marker from the other side, and now we're just gonna square it up from the top mark and the bottom mark right here. And we'll get this panel square, and that should keep the rest of the run in line, and we'll just double check it every few panels and make sure we're still running square. What do you got there?
21 5/8.
21. We got the first ridge cap right up here. We're attaching it to the other side, and then we're hoping that we can lift this up enough, slide each panel in, and still be able to screw it. But It's about some of the few options that we see physically being able to do up here, because this is pretty damn high. But I'll get you guys set up on time lapse and we'll start running this side and hopefully get it knocked out.
Now, since we took the extra time and got our first panel square with the building, the rest of them went on pretty easily. And installing the ridge cap as we went was definitely a good move. Once we installed the metal on the 812 roof, it was almost impossible to stand on without sliding off.
So we finally finished the top. It's all done, minus one section on the very end. I'm gonna wait on that because I'm gonna get a bucket lift or a man lift when I do the siding, so I figured I'll knock that out then. We got the side shed roof set up, so we're gonna stack them right here. We'll be a lot closer to the ground, so this hopefully will be a little bit easier. I'm gonna rack them up against the rafter tails right here and then hand them up to James and we'll start screwing the side shed roofs in. What do you think, Ken, bro?
I think it's gonna be great.
Excitement all around.
Now, the shed roof sides went a lot quicker. I stayed on the ground and placed each sheet up, and my buddy James walked up the sheet, adding the fasteners as he went.
So we have one shed roof and the center of the barn complete with a metal roof. And this will be the third work day on the metal roof. Hopefully we're gonna get this last shed roof complete, and I'll share the cost of all the roofing material with you guys, and we'll update the total build cost so far on this pole barn. All right, this side of the shed roof is going a lot slower because every panel, it rained yesterday, so every panel that we're pulling has condensation buildup on it like crazy. So it's pretty much like walking on a wet metal roof. But I got James up there, he's probably got the harder job. I'm passing all the panels from the ground. He's screwing them all in, so. James, don't fall off. So after 3 long hard work days, we finally finished the metal roof on the pole barn. Now I gotta say, that was probably one of the tougher jobs we've done so far. Not that it was extremely difficult, but the major issue was the awkwardness of standing up high in the rafters, not really having a good footing to stand on, and then each panel we added to the roof made it more of a steeper incline. But let's go over a couple of the issues that we had, and maybe you can address those better if you do this on your job, and then we'll break down the cost of this metal material and the total cost for the whole build so far. So one of the first issues we ran into was our overlap seam. As you can see right here, this seam is probably noticeable. And if you step back and look at every panel, probably about half of them stand out. The seam stands out, it's kind of lifted. So I'm not sure if this is something that we were doing, but we were trying to adjust this and get it as tight as we could get it, or as flush as we can get it along the way before we screwed it. But for some reason, it just never overlapped correctly, and you could always kind of see it instead of it camouflaging in. So I'm not sure if that's like a manufacturer, maybe the die was worn out where they spit out this metal panel at, or they just needed some adjustments on their sheen where they manufactured it. So keep that in mind. Maybe like talk to the manufacturer about this overlap seam before you purchase, and just see if they're willing to stand behind their sheets that they spit out. One of the next issues we had with the metal on some sections of the roof is squaring it up. Now these metal sheets are perfectly square, so once you put them on your building, it will not lie. If your building is out of square, it will show, and it'll overhang, you know, an inch or two more here or there where you don't want it to. So always keep that in mind. The building has to be perfectly square, or else you have to compensate a lot with this metal, which is fine. They make a lot of trim pieces to cover and hide that type of stuff, but just make sure you keep that in mind if you're gonna do a metal roof while you're building. Double check everything. And lastly, when we started screwing this metal roof on, we used our 1/4 inch driver bits that kind of came in a lot of those DeWalt kits or Makita kits, whatever you have, your standard stock ones. And we noticed that these screw heads are so small they slip out of a lot of those, and it really takes a good bit to hold these screw heads in. So I bit the bullet and bought some nice DeWalt 1/4 inch drivers that had a 6-inch extension on there, and these work perfectly when you're standing up on the roof screwing it down. It gives you a little bit of height, and these heads just work a lot better because they're made exactly for 1/4 inch screw heads. So spend the money and buy you some good bits before you start this job. So now for the running total on this pole barn build. Originally, if you guys remember, up until last episode, we were at $7,950 for pretty much the entire bit of framing. Now we did have to buy the purlins before we put on the metal roof. Those are what the metal roof attached to that float across the top of the rafters. The purlins were $650. We used 2x4s for those, and then the metal roofing material was right at $2,600 for everything. That was with transitions, ridge cap, and screws. Now there is a lot more trim options you can add to your metal roof if you want to get really fancy with it. I'm not. This is pretty much just a barn when it comes down to it, so I'm just going to do the minimal amount of trim work on it. So that brings the total cost for this pole barn as it stands right to $11,200. As always, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next week for another episode of this budget pole barn build.